The fastest way to lose faith in the system is to watch it punish the wrong person. The cold blue lights of the downtown precinct reflected across the wet pavement as I stepped out of the diner just after midnight. My shift had ended 40 minutes late because a busload of college students had decided they all wanted pie at the same time. My feet hurt. My shoulders hurt. And all I wanted was to get home to my tiny apartment, kick off my shoes, and forget that tomorrow's rent was due in 3 days. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself and started walking toward the subway entrance 3 blocks away. The city felt different after midnight. Quieter. Not silent, just tired. Like everyone still awake had somewhere they would rather be. I checked the time on my phone. 12:17 a.m. If I caught the next train, I could be home in 25 minutes. That was the plan. Then I heard someone crying. The sound came from the alley beside a convenience store across the street. A teenager stood near the wall, maybe 16 or 17 years old, his hoodie soaked from the misty rain. He looked terrified. 2 uniformed officers stood nearby questioning him. One officer had his arms crossed. The other kept talking while the kid stared at the ground. I should have kept walking. Most people would have. But something about the way the teenager's shoulders shook made me stop. "Hey," I called from the sidewalk. "Is everything okay?" The officers turned toward me immediately. The teenager looked up. Relief flashed across his face for a split second. "Ma'am," one officer said sharply. "Keep moving." I hesitated. "I just asked if he was okay. And I just told you to keep moving." The tone in his voice made my stomach tighten. The teenager opened his mouth. "I didn't do anything," he said. "I was just waiting for my brother." "Quiet," the officer snapped. I looked from the officer to the kid. Something felt wrong. Maybe I should have minded my own business. Maybe I should have listened. But I couldn't walk away. "He's a kid," I said. "Can someone call his parents?" The older officer stepped closer. "What's your name?" "Emma." "Emma what?" "Why?" His expression hardened. "Because I'm asking." The conversation should have ended there. Instead, everything spiraled. Within minutes another patrol car arrived. Questions became accusations. Accusations became assumptions. Suddenly, I wasn't a waitress walking home from work anymore. I was a witness. Then a suspect. Then a problem. "I think you've been interfering with an active investigation," one officer said. I actually laughed because the statement sounded ridiculous. Interfering? I asked one question. "That's not what we have." "What does that even mean?" Nobody answered. Rain tapped against the hood of the patrol car as more officers appeared. The teenager was gone. I never even saw where they took him. One moment he was standing there. The next, all attention had shifted to me. My pulse quickened. "Am I being detained?" I asked. The officers exchanged looks. The kind that told me decisions were being made without me. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." "For what?" "To answer a few questions." "Here?" "At the precinct." Every instinct told me this was a mistake. I didn't do anything wrong. Then you have nothing to worry about. People always say that like it's comforting. It isn't. 20 minutes later I sat alone in the back seat of a police cruiser watching city lights blur past the window. The downtown precinct rose ahead like a concrete fortress beneath cold fluorescent lights. Officers moved through the front entrance carrying coffee cups and paperwork. Nobody looked at me. Nobody explained anything. The knot in my stomach tightened with every step inside. Phones rang. Radios crackled. Officers walked quickly through narrow hallways without making eye contact. The place smelled like stale coffee and exhaustion. A female officer directed me toward a small interview room. "Have a seat. Can someone tell me what's happening?" She didn't answer. The metal door closed behind me with a heavy click. I stared at the empty chair across the table. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My phone had been taken. Nobody offered an explanation. Nobody offered a lawyer. Nobody offered basic courtesy. Through the narrow glass window I could see officers walking past. Some glanced inside. Some smiled. None stopped. For the first time that night, real fear began settling into my chest. Not because I thought I had done something wrong. Because I realized nobody in this building seemed interested in whether I had or not. And somewhere beyond the closed door, decisions about my future were already being made. The door finally opened after what felt like an hour, though the clock on the wall said only 37 minutes had passed. A detective stepped inside carrying a thin folder and a paper cup of coffee. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes that looked more annoyed than interested. He sat across from me, opened the folder, and flipped through a few pages without speaking. The silence felt deliberate. Like he wanted me to fill it. I did not. "Emma Reeves," he finally said. 26 years old. Waitress at Midtown Grill. "That is right. You were near an active police investigation tonight." "I was walking home from work." He nodded slowly. "According to one statement, you interfered with officers while they were attempting to question a suspect." I asked if a teenager was okay. "That is not how it is written here." My stomach tightened. "Written by who?" He ignored the question. "Did you know the individual being questioned?" "No." "Had you met him before?" "No." "Were you assisting him?" "No." The detective leaned back in his chair. "Then why involve yourself?" "Because he looked scared." The answer seemed to irritate him. He closed the folder and folded his hands together. "Miss Reeves, people who cooperate usually get to go home much faster." "Cooperate with what?" "Help us understand what really happened." I stared at him. "I have been telling the truth since I got here." He slid a document across the table. "Read that." I looked down. My heart sank. The statement claimed I had approached officers aggressively, attempted to disrupt questioning, and refused multiple lawful instructions. None of it was true. Not even close. "I am not signing this." "You have not finished reading it." "I do not need to." "You should reconsider." "No." The detective's expression hardened slightly. Not anger. Disappointment. Like I was making his night inconvenient. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "By refusing to lie?" He tapped the paper with one finger. "Nobody is asking you to lie." "Then why does this say things that never happened?" For the first time, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the hall a phone rang twice before stopping. The detective collected the paper and stood. "Think carefully about your situation." "What situation?" "The one where nobody else in that alley is available to answer questions." Then he left. The door closed again. This time the sound felt heavier. I sat alone staring at the empty chair. The knot in my stomach had become something colder. Something sharper. This was no misunderstanding. Someone had already decided what story they wanted. An hour later a younger officer escorted me to another room while paperwork moved between desks outside. The new room was larger but somehow felt worse. Several officers stood nearby drinking coffee and talking quietly. Conversations stopped when I entered. One of them smirked. Another looked away. Still refusing to cooperate, someone asked. I did not answer. "That usually does not end well," another voice said. The comment drew a few chuckles. Heat rose into my face. Not because I was embarrassed. Because I was angry. I had done nothing wrong. Yet somehow I was the one sitting under fluorescent lights while the people accusing me walked freely through the building. I folded my arms and looked straight ahead. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. The officers continued their conversations around me as if I were not even there. Every now and then one would glance my way. Every glance carried the same message. They expected me to break. They expected me to sign whatever they placed in front of me. They expected obedience. Instead, I sat there quietly. Outside the room, through a narrow glass panel, I caught sight of a lieutenant carrying a file. My name was printed across the front. He handed it to another officer who frowned as he read something inside. The officer looked surprised. Then concerned. Then he quickly closed the folder and disappeared down the hallway. For the first time that night, something shifted. I did not know what it meant. But somewhere inside that building, a detail had surfaced that nobody expected to find. The officer who had carried my file never came back, but the atmosphere around me changed after that. It was subtle at first. Conversations stopped when I looked up. Two officers standing near the coffee machine lowered their voices the moment I walked past. A desk sergeant glanced at me, then quickly at the monitor on his desk as if checking something he did not want anyone else to see. Whatever was inside that file had made somebody nervous. Unfortunately, it had not made anyone willing to let me leave. By 2 o'clock in the morning, exhaustion settled into my bones. I had been awake since 6. I had worked a full shift carrying trays, refilling coffee, and smiling through rude customers. Now I sat inside a police precinct with no answers and no way to contact anyone. My phone remained locked in a property bag somewhere behind the front desk. A female officer finally escorted me into a waiting area near the holding corridor. Metal chairs lined one wall beneath harsh fluorescent lights. A vending machine hummed in the corner. The television mounted overhead played a late-night news broadcast with the volume muted. I sat down and wrapped my arms around myself. Across the room, 2 officers watched me while pretending not to. Every few minutes one of them would look in my direction and whisper something to the other. The whispers always ended with a smile. Not a friendly smile. The kind designed to make someone feel small. I looked away. One officer approached carrying a clipboard. "Long night?" he asked. "You could say that. You know, most people would have signed the statement by now. Most people probably did not get handed a false statement." His smile disappeared. "Careful." "With what?" "Attitude." I stared at him for a moment. "I have been respectful all night." "Depends who you ask." Then he walked away. My jaw tightened. That was the entire point. Nobody cared what actually happened. They only cared about controlling the narrative. Somewhere in the building a version of events already existed, and they wanted me to help make it official. Around 2:30, a young public defender finally appeared. Relief washed through me for exactly 3 seconds before she sat down beside me and opened a folder. "Emma, I reviewed what they have." "And?" "There is not much." "That sounds good." She hesitated. "Normally it would be." "What does that mean?" She lowered her voice. "It means somebody keeps adding notes without attaching actual evidence." I frowned. "Can they do that?" "They should not." The answer was not comforting. She flipped through several pages. Every time one claim falls apart, another one appears. So they are making it up. She closed the folder. I did not say that. The look in her eyes said enough. Before I could ask another question, a lieutenant stepped into the waiting area. "Counselor, I need a word." The public defender stood reluctantly and followed him into a nearby office. Through the glass wall I watched them talk. The lieutenant did most of the talking. The public defender listened with her arms crossed. After a minute she looked frustrated. After 2 minutes she looked angry. Then the meeting ended. When she returned, her expression had completely changed. "What happened?" I asked. She gathered her folder. "I have another case across town." "You are leaving?" "I will be back later." "Later when?" She avoided my eyes. "I do not know." Then she walked away. I watched the front door close behind her and felt something sink inside my chest. For the first time all night, I felt truly alone. Not because nobody believed me. Because the people who did believe me suddenly seemed unable to help. The clock on the wall clicked past 3 o'clock. Rain tapped softly against the precinct windows. Officers continued moving through the building while paperwork changed hands and phones rang. Yet every time I asked a question, nobody had an answer. Every time I requested clarification, another delay appeared. Then, just before 3:15, I noticed something strange. A detective hurried through the hallway carrying a report. Another officer stopped him. They exchanged a few words. The detective looked stunned. "You are kidding," he said. The other officer shook his head. Both men immediately looked toward me. Not casually. Directly. Then they disappeared into an office and closed the door. Whatever they had just learned was important. And for the first time since entering the precinct, I had the unmistakable feeling that somewhere outside these walls, someone else had started asking questions too. By 3:30 in the morning, the rain outside had become a steady curtain of silver against the precinct windows. The waiting area had grown quieter, but the tension inside the building felt heavier than ever. Officers moved faster now. Doors opened and closed. Conversations stopped whenever someone new entered a room. Whatever had changed was spreading through the precinct like an electrical current. I sat alone beneath the fluorescent lights pretending not to notice. Then a detective I had never seen before walked past carrying a thick report. As he turned the corner, several loose pages slipped from the folder and scattered across the floor. He cursed under his breath and quickly bent to collect them. One page landed only a few feet from my chair. My eyes caught a single line before he grabbed it. Case review request. External inquiry. The detective froze when he realized I had seen it. For a brief moment our eyes met. He looked uncomfortable. Then he stuffed the paper back into the folder and hurried away without saying a word. An external inquiry. The phrase repeated inside my head. Someone outside this building was asking questions. The realization should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me nervous. If someone was investigating, that meant something bigger was happening. Something serious. 20 miles away, across the river, a black luxury sedan rolled through the empty streets of Manhattan. Inside the back seat, Vincent sat silently reviewing a digital report on a tablet. The city lights reflected across the window beside him. He wore a tailored black suit despite the late hour. Dark ink tattoos disappeared beneath his cuffs and climbed the side of his neck. Most people who met him remembered the tattoos first. The smart ones remembered his eyes. Calm. Focused. Always calculating. Across from him sat his chief advisor, Marcus. The report should have been routine, Marcus said. Then why was it flagged? Vincent asked without looking up. Because somebody altered it. Vincent continued reading. The report described a disturbance involving a teenager, 2 patrol officers, and an unidentified civilian witness. That witness was Emma Reeves. Her name appeared 6 times. Each version of the report told a different story. Vincent disliked inconsistencies. In his experience, contradictions usually meant someone was hiding something. How many revisions? He asked. 7. Vincent finally looked up. 7? Marcus nodded. Within 3 hours. That was impossible to justify. Even legitimate investigations did not generate that many corrections in a single night. Vincent studied the screen again. The final version contained language that felt manufactured. Too clean. Too deliberate. Whoever wrote it wanted readers to reach a specific conclusion. Who requested the changes? Vincent asked. Marcus slid another document across the seat. Nobody wants to answer that question. Vincent's expression remained unchanged. That was answer enough. The sedan continued through the sleeping city. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Vincent read every page twice. Most people saw paperwork as boring. Vincent saw patterns. Patterns revealed motives. Motives revealed truth. And the truth buried inside this file was becoming impossible to ignore. Back at the precinct, I watched the clock crawl toward 4 o'clock. An officer finally approached my chair. Miss Reeves. I looked up. Yes? Come with me. He led me down a narrow hallway toward another interview room. This one was different. Cleaner. Quieter. No intimidating smiles. No sarcastic comments. The officer even held the door open for me. The sudden politeness felt strange. What changed? I asked. He hesitated. Nothing. It was an obvious lie. Inside the room sat a lieutenant reviewing paperwork. He looked tired. More importantly, he looked worried. He closed the folder when I entered. Miss Reeves, we are still reviewing certain aspects of tonight's incident. You have been reviewing it for hours. These things take time. Not usually 4 hours. His jaw tightened. Before he could respond, someone knocked on the door. Another officer stepped inside carrying a phone. Sir, you need to take this. The lieutenant accepted the phone. Who is it? The officer swallowed. Someone asking questions about the Reeves case. The room went silent. The lieutenant's face lost color almost immediately. He stood and walked into the hallway. Through the partially open door I could hear only fragments of the conversation. Then one sentence drifted clearly into the room. Who told him about this? Every instinct told me that whoever was on the other end of that call had just changed everything. The lieutenant did not return for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally stepped back into the room, he looked like a man carrying a problem he could not solve. He sat across from me, adjusted the folder on the table, and avoided eye contact. That alone told me more than anything he could have said. Miss Reeves, he began carefully, there are some developments. What kind of developments? He opened the folder, closed it again, then exhaled slowly. Additional reviews are being conducted. By who? That information is not available. I almost laughed. Everything in this building seemed unavailable except accusations. Before I could respond, another knock interrupted us. The same officer appeared in the doorway. Sir, he is here. The lieutenant froze. Every trace of color drained from his face. Already? The officer nodded. He is in the lobby. A strange silence filled the room. The lieutenant stood so quickly his chair nearly tipped backward. Stay here, he said. Then he walked out without another word. Curiosity pushed aside my exhaustion. Through the narrow glass window beside the door, I watched officers moving through the hallway. The atmosphere had changed completely. People who had spent hours acting confident suddenly looked tense. Phones rang unanswered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Several officers hurried toward the front entrance. Others moved in the opposite direction carrying files and tablets. Whatever was happening, it was affecting everyone. I stood and carefully stepped closer to the glass. From where I stood, I could see part of the front desk area. Then I saw him. A tall man entered the precinct wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. Rainwater glistened on his coat from the storm outside. His dark hair was slicked back. Black ink tattoos disappeared beneath his collar and extended across one hand as he removed a pair of leather gloves. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand attention. Yet every person in the lobby noticed him immediately. The room seemed to shift around him. Officers who had been speaking moments earlier suddenly became quiet. Even the desk sergeant stood straighter. The man approached the front desk with calm confidence. A woman beside him carried a briefcase. 2 other men remained several steps behind. Professional. Silent. Watching everything. Vincent Moretti, one officer whispered. The name meant nothing to me. But the reaction around him meant something. Nobody looked comfortable. Nobody looked pleased. They looked cautious. The way people look when they realize a routine problem has become something much larger. Vincent placed a document on the front desk. I am here regarding Emma Reeves. His voice carried clearly through the lobby despite never rising above a calm tone. The desk sergeant swallowed. Sir, this is an active investigation. Then you will have no issue explaining why 7 different reports were submitted under the same case number. Silence. Complete silence. Several officers exchanged nervous looks. Vincent glanced around the room once. Not aggressively. Simply observing. Yet somehow that seemed worse. He noticed everything. I requested clarification 3 hours ago, he continued. Instead, I received 4 conflicting explanations. The lieutenant finally appeared from the hallway. Mr. Moretti. Vincent turned toward him. Lieutenant. The tension between them felt immediate. Not hostility. Recognition. 2 men who understood exactly what was happening. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, the lieutenant said. I would prefer transparency. Vincent's eyes shifted briefly toward the hallway leading to the interview rooms. Especially since Miss Reeves has apparently spent half the night waiting for answers. Hearing my name made my chest tighten. I had never met this man. I was certain of it. Yet he was here because of me. The realization should have made me grateful. Instead, it made me uneasy. Nobody with this much influence arrived at 4 in the morning for a stranger without a reason. The lieutenant guided Vincent toward a conference room near the lobby. As they disappeared inside, the building erupted into motion again. Officers hurried between offices. Phones started ringing. Doors opened and closed. A detective carrying a stack of reports nearly collided with another officer rushing in the opposite direction. For the first time all night, the people who had controlled every conversation no longer seemed in control at all. I returned to my chair and stared at the closed conference room door visible at the end of the hallway. Somewhere inside, decisions were being made. And despite everything that had happened, a new feeling settled into my chest. Not relief. Not trust. Suspicion. Because whatever Vincent Moretti wanted, it had just become more important than the story they had been trying so hard to force me to believe. The conference room door remained closed for nearly 40 minutes. In a place where every second had dragged by all night, those 40 minutes felt different. The tension inside the precinct had become visible. Officers who had spent hours acting confident now moved with nervous urgency. Files changed hands. Supervisors appeared from offices that had been dark all night. More than once I caught someone looking toward the conference room before quickly looking away. Whatever was happening inside was affecting everyone outside. Shortly after 5 o'clock, the door finally opened. Vincent stepped into the hallway first. His expression had not changed. Calm. Controlled. Impossible to read. The lieutenant followed several steps behind. He looked exhausted. The difference between them was impossible to miss. One man appeared completely unaffected. The other looked as though he had aged 10 years since midnight. As Vincent walked through the hallway, conversation stopped. Nobody ordered silence. It simply happened. He paused near a detective's desk and picked up a report. "Interesting," he said quietly. The detective shifted uncomfortably. "Sir?" Vincent placed the document back down. "This version says Miss Reeves disrupted an investigation." He picked up another report from the same desk. "This version says she attempted to leave the scene." Then a third. "And this one says she refused instructions before officers even spoke to her." His eyes lifted calmly. 3 different timelines. 1 incident. Nobody answered. The silence was answer enough. A supervisor stepped forward. "Mr. Moretti, we are reviewing procedural issues." "You should." Vincent's voice remained level. "Because someone clearly forgot that reports are supposed to support facts." The supervisor looked away first. I watched the exchange from my chair and felt something unexpected. Relief should have been my first reaction. Someone was finally questioning everything that had happened. Instead, I felt uneasy. Vincent was not a lawyer. He was not a judge. Yet somehow the entire building was responding to him more than it had responded to any official process. That bothered me. It should not have taken a man like him to make people care about the truth. A few minutes later, a female administrator approached me. Her tone was suddenly polite. "Miss Reeves, we would like to move you to a more comfortable room." I stared at her. "Now?" "Yes." "After 7 hours?" Her expression tightened. "Please come with me." The room they moved me into was cleaner. Someone even brought coffee. The gesture felt absurd after everything that had happened. I sat by the window watching dawn slowly brighten the city outside. The rain had finally stopped. Gray morning light spread across the skyline. For the first time all night, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. Then the door opened. Vincent entered alone. Up close, he looked exactly as intimidating as everyone seemed to think. The tailored black suit. The tattoos visible along his neck and hands. The calm confidence. Yet none of those things held my attention. It was the way he looked at people. Focused. Direct. Like he was constantly evaluating everything around him. "Miss Reeves. You know my name." "I do." "I do not know yours." "Vincent." I folded my arms. "Why are you here?" He seemed unsurprised by the question. "Because your case raised concerns." "My case?" I laughed softly. "I am a waitress who got stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes that is enough." The answer irritated me. "No. It should not be enough." His expression remained calm. "I agree." The room fell quiet. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me for hours. "What exactly did you do?" Vincent studied me carefully. I asked questions. Questions that apparently nobody else could ask. Questions they could not avoid answering. That response settled heavily in my chest. There it was. The thing that had been bothering me since he arrived. Influence. Power. The ability to make people cooperate because they feared the consequences of refusing. "That is not justice," I said quietly. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly. "No. Justice should not depend on who walks through the door." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Not offense. Something closer to disappointment. "Perhaps," he said. "But tonight it did." The answer stayed with me long after he left the room. Because deep down, I hated that he was right. The sun had fully risen by the time the next shock arrived. Through the window, I watched a line of black SUVs pull into the precinct parking lot. One after another. Clean. Identical. Purposeful. People inside the building noticed immediately. Officers stopped walking long enough to glance outside. Detectives drifted toward windows. Even the front desk sergeant looked uneasy. Whatever confidence remained inside the precinct seemed to disappear with the arrival of those vehicles. A few minutes later, the hallway filled with unfamiliar faces carrying briefcases, folders, and identification badges clipped to their jackets. Nobody announced who they were, but the reaction around them spoke loudly enough. Supervisors suddenly wanted meetings. Doors that had remained closed all night swung open. Requests for records were answered immediately. The entire atmosphere shifted from control to damage control. I stood near the window watching the activity when Vincent appeared beside me. "Quite a morning," he said. I turned toward him. "Did you bring them?" His expression remained calm. "Some of them." "How many people work for you?" "Enough." The answer frustrated me. "You always talk like that?" "Like what?" "Like every question is a negotiation." For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Close enough to count. Occupational habit. Outside, more vehicles arrived. Inside, tension continued spreading through the building. I watched officers carrying boxes of files down the hallway. "This is because of you," I said. No, Vincent looked toward the activity outside the room. "This is because of choices people made before I arrived. They only started caring after you arrived." The words came out sharper than I intended. Vincent's eyes returned to mine. "You believe that makes the truth less important?" "I believe the truth should matter before someone powerful demands it." Silence settled between us. Neither of us looked away. The disagreement was no longer about what happened to me. It was about something bigger. The way we saw the world. "You think influence corrupts justice," Vincent said quietly. "Does it not?" "Sometimes influence exposes corruption that already exists. And who decides when it is being used for the right reasons?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Not anger. Restraint." "That is a fair question." "I am serious." "So am I." The room grew quiet again. For a moment, I saw something unexpected behind his controlled expression. Fatigue. Not physical exhaustion. Something older. He looked like a man who had spent years fighting battles nobody else understood. Yet that did not change what I felt. "I appreciate what you did," I said. "But I do not like it." Vincent nodded once. "I know." The answer surprised me. "You know? People usually do not." I folded my arms. "Then why keep doing it?" He looked through the glass toward the hallway where investigators were now interviewing officers. "Because sometimes people who should be protected are not." His voice remained calm. "And waiting for the system to correct itself is not always an option." The words stayed with me. Part of me wanted to argue. Another part hated how much sense they made. Before I could respond, a supervisor hurried into the room carrying a report. "Mr. Moretti." Vincent accepted the folder. He scanned the first page. His expression never changed, but the supervisor visibly relaxed after handing it over. As though completing an unpleasant task. Vincent closed the file and handed it back. "Thank you." The supervisor left immediately. I stared at the door after it closed. "They are afraid of you." Vincent did not answer right away. "Some are." "That does not bother you?" "Fear is rarely useful." "Then why does it follow you everywhere?" For the first time since we met, Vincent looked away. Only briefly. But long enough for me to notice. Because people often confuse certainty with danger. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Yet every time I looked around the precinct, I saw the same thing. Doors opening. Records appearing. Rules suddenly being enforced. Not because justice had awakened overnight. Because Vincent Moretti had walked through the front entrance. The realization disappointed me more than I expected. And judging by the look in his eyes, he knew exactly why. The breakthrough arrived just after 8 in the morning. By then the precinct looked nothing like it had a few hours earlier. Investigators occupied conference rooms. Supervisors reviewed reports line by line. Officers who had spent the night acting untouchable now avoided eye contact whenever they crossed the hallway. The entire building felt like it was holding its breath. I sat near the window watching clouds drift above the city when a sudden burst of movement caught my attention. 3 investigators hurried toward the evidence department carrying folders and sealed envelopes. Behind them, a detective I recognized from earlier looked pale. Not nervous. Defeated. Whatever they had found was significant. Minutes later, the lieutenant entered the room carrying a thick file. He looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing a situation can no longer be controlled. Miss Reeves, he said carefully. We have completed an initial review. I remained silent. After everything that had happened, I was finished helping them find the right words. The lieutenant opened the file. The investigation determined that multiple reports were altered after the original incident. My chest tightened. Altered how? Statements were modified. Timelines were adjusted. Information was added that could not be independently verified. Hearing the words out loud felt surreal. For hours I had known something was wrong. Now someone inside the building was finally admitting it. So what happens now? I asked. The lieutenant hesitated. Several internal reviews are underway. Translation. People were scrambling to protect themselves. Before he could continue, another investigator appeared at the door. Sir, they found the footage. The lieutenant closed his eyes briefly. Confirmed? Yes. All of it? Everything. The investigator glanced toward me before leaving. My pulse quickened immediately. Footage. Security footage. The one thing nobody had wanted to discuss all night. The one thing that could not be pressured, persuaded, or rewritten. 20 minutes later, activity exploded throughout the precinct. Phones rang non-stop. Supervisors moved between offices carrying reports. More investigators arrived. Through the hallway window I watched one officer arguing with another before both disappeared into a conference room. Nobody looked confident anymore. The story they had spent hours building was collapsing under its own weight. Vincent stood near the front lobby reviewing documents with Marcus when another investigator approached. Mr. Moretti. Vincent looked up. Yes? The footage supports Miss Reeves' account. Vincent simply nodded. I expected it would. The investigator seemed surprised by the response. That is all? Truth tends to be consistent. The investigator left without another word. Marcus watched him go. You do not seem surprised. I am not. Vincent returned to the documents. People usually hide evidence when they know what it contains. Back in the interview room, a different detective arrived carrying a formal statement. Unlike everyone else I had encountered, he looked embarrassed. Genuinely embarrassed. Miss Reeves, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. The words hung in the air. Simple. Direct. Honest. More honest than anything I had heard since entering the building. The review confirmed that you were never a suspect. I stared at him. Then why was I treated like one? He looked down at the folder in his hands. That question is part of a much larger investigation. It was not a complete answer, but it was the first truthful one. A few minutes later, the same detective handed me a document confirming that no charges existed, no active investigation involved me, and no legal basis had ever justified keeping me there. The paper felt strangely light in my hands considering how much damage had been done. My freedom had always existed. It had simply been ignored. Outside the room, conversations continued. Reviews continued. Consequences were beginning to unfold. Yet my attention shifted toward something else. Through the glass wall I spotted Vincent standing near the lobby entrance. Calm as ever. Watching the activity around him without participating in it. The truth had finally surfaced. The reports had fallen apart. The footage had exposed everything. Yet the uncomfortable question remained. Would any of this have happened if he had never walked through those doors? The answer settled heavily in my chest because I already knew it. When the final document was placed in my hands, the building suddenly felt smaller. Not because the precinct had changed, but because the weight it had held over me was finally gone. I read the statement twice. No charges. No investigation. No legal basis for my detention. A simple collection of words that should have existed from the very beginning. Outside the interview room, the morning rush had started to awaken the city. Sunlight pushed through the gray clouds, reflecting off wet pavement and glass buildings. The storm was over. At least outside. Inside me, things felt more complicated. A detective escorted me toward the front lobby. This time nobody stopped me. Nobody questioned me. Nobody asked me to sign anything. The same officers who had ignored me hours earlier now stepped aside as I walked past. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked embarrassed. A few simply disappeared into nearby offices. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. More tired than I had ever been in my life. Near the entrance, the detective handed back my phone and personal belongings. Miss Reeves, he said quietly, for whatever it is worth, I am sorry. I studied him for a moment. Unlike the others, he seemed sincere. Thank you, I said. Then I walked away. The lobby doors opened automatically. Cool morning air rushed against my face. For the first time in nearly 9 hours, I was outside. The parking lot glistened beneath the early sunlight. Black SUVs remained parked near the curb. Several men stood nearby speaking quietly into phones. The city traffic beyond the lot sounded strangely beautiful. Normal. Familiar. Free. I took a deep breath and started walking toward the sidewalk. Emma. I stopped. Vincent stood several yards away beside one of the vehicles. The morning light caught the dark ink tattoos along his hands as he slipped a phone into his pocket. For a moment neither of us spoke. Everything that needed to be said seemed too complicated for words. Finally, he walked closer. Are you okay? The question surprised me. Not because he asked it. Because it was the first simple question anyone had asked all night. No accusations. No hidden motives. No paperwork. Just concern. I considered giving an easy answer. Instead, I told the truth. I do not know. Vincent nodded once. Fair answer. Silence settled between us again. Across the parking lot, investigators continued entering and leaving the building. The consequences of the night would continue long after I was gone. Reports would be reviewed. Questions would be asked. Careers might change. None of that felt important anymore. You were right about one thing, I said. Vincent raised an eyebrow slightly. Only one? Despite everything, I almost smiled. The truth mattered. It usually does. But I was right too. His expression remained calm. About what? It should not take someone like you to make people care. For a brief moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Not disagreement. Not offense. Something closer to regret. He glanced toward the precinct before looking back at me. No, he said quietly. It should not. The honesty caught me off guard. I had expected a defense. An argument. Instead, he simply accepted it. Maybe that was what made him different from everyone else inside that building. He did not pretend the system worked perfectly. He did not pretend power was fair. He simply saw the world as it was. What happens now? I asked. Vincent looked toward the city beyond the parking lot. For them? For me. His attention returned to me. You go home. Such a simple answer. Yet hearing it felt like a gift. Home. Coffee. Sleep. A normal day. Things I had taken for granted less than 24 hours earlier. Vincent opened the rear door of the SUV. I can have someone drive you. I looked at the vehicle, then back at him. A few hours ago, I would have refused immediately. Now I hesitated. No strings attached? None. That is hard to believe. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. I know. I studied him for another second before shaking my head. I think I need to walk. Vincent accepted the answer without question. Then walk. I started toward the sidewalk. After a few steps, I looked back. Vincent remained exactly where he was, hands in his pockets, watching the city wake up around him. Not a hero. Not a villain. Just a man carrying more influence than anyone should have and somehow choosing to use it for me. As I continued down the block, sunlight finally broke through the clouds above the city. And I realized something I would never forget. The people who failed me had authority. The people who apologized had integrity. And sometimes the difference between those two things changes everything.